I actually just learned this year, we get a local CSA box for our produce, and they sent
Awesome.
out a little letter with information in it, and, they basically said that if you're buying apples from the store right now, those were harvested last year, and they're
Yep.
just, like, well preserved, and I had no idea.
Yeah.
So, yeah, some of that stuff we're very fortunate to have access to a lot of things, but I think with the wine industry, the the pressures of the season really shape your life a lot. Like you said, I kind of think that that's a really cool thing to be, out there and seeing the vineyard and seeing the whole life cycle of the vine. And yeah, just, it's a big part of what we do on a day to day basis.
All right. Welcome, everyone, back to the Barrels and Roots podcast. My name is Sean Trace. I'm your host, and I've got an awesome guest with me today. Would you like to tell people who you are and what you do?
Yeah. My name is Kelsey Gorter, and I am a winemaker, and I also work in bulk wine sales and acquisitions.
It's awesome. Uh, how did you get started in the world of wine?
Uh, that's a great question. I feel like people find the wine industry from so many different routes.
Mm,
And I personally made my way in through the laboratory. So
oh,
I was a high school teacher for 6 years right out of college. I taught high school chemistry. And I quickly got interested in wine. And I took a chance. I had gotten my tenure and I took a leave of absence and worked some harvests. So I worked harvests in California, down in the Southern Hemisphere. I worked a few back to back harvests down there. And I kinda didn't really look back. I really loved being a teacher, but, I was able to take my science degree and background and start using it towards, building a new career and learning about how wine is made.
that's awesome. Well, and
Yeah.
it's interesting that, you hear different avenues people get into it, but coming from an education background is really interesting because uh, there's always a different way of looking at things. But was there a moment where you realized that this was more than a job for you? This was something that you actually like really loved?
Yeah, and I think that one thing I really love about it is that it's cyclical, which
Mm,
is, anything in agriculture, right?
yeah,
Teaching was cyclical as well. And so I kind of like that idea of getting to try to do the same thing again and again each year,
yeah,
but obviously with differences and new challenges and things like that. So, I feel like wine is so interesting. It has so many different components to keep you on your toes. And so I didn't really see like a limit to the learning possibilities. And like, the wine industry is in such a strange place right now, but we're evolving and adapting. And
yeah.
there's a lot to unpack there. And, it felt like a lifelong pursuit, which I think is a really key thing in finding something that you want to do, long term.
I love that. And I love the idea of cycles because everything has ebbs and flows. That
Hmm.
there are times where you're pushing, time where you're stepping back. I actually studied acupuncture and Chinese medicine in one of my
Oh, cool.
lives. And I never finished my degree. I've been finishing it slowly from distance type of stuff. And
Yeah,
I do a podcast for that as well for the school that I,
cool.
I, I study at. But one of the core concepts is of like the yin yang, things
Hmm.
ebb and flow, and
Yep.
there's always a different time. There's a time for things to go forward, a time for things to come back, and yet, generally, it baked into the philosophy is this understanding of these ebbs and flows, and
Hmm.
I think it's something that people when we were working more in agriculture understood, but now in
Yep.
our modern world, we don't always get that as much.
Yeah.
Like think about like supermarkets. You go to the supermarket and year round, you're expecting there to be apples like
Totally.
on the shelves. Like you are expecting I'm going to buy things at the supermarket. I
Hmm.
will see apples, I will get apples. And people don't really understand that you're getting apples year round because they're being shipped in from very far away places and that the actual nature of our food is much more cyclical than people realize.
Yes. 100%. I actually just learned this year, we get a local CSA box for our produce, and they sent
Awesome.
out a little letter with information in it, and, they basically said that if you're buying apples from the store right now, those were harvested last year, and they're
Yep.
just, like, well preserved, and I had no idea.
Yeah.
So, yeah, some of that stuff we're very fortunate to have access to a lot of things, but I think with the wine industry, the the pressures of the season really shape your life a lot. Like you said, I kind of think that that's a really cool thing to be, out there and seeing the vineyard and seeing the whole life cycle of the vine. And yeah, just, it's a big part of what we do on a day to day basis.
I not to romanticize it too much, but man, it is romantic in a way. Like in
Yeah.
a way, like what I thought about it's there's something that an undertone I hear from a lot of winemakers is this art of being present in the
Hmm.
process.
Yep.
And that's something that's so interesting to me. Like this morning, I knew I had to get my daughter to school and I had to come back and do this podcast. And there was a moment where I was just like, all right, let's get you out the door. Let's get
Yeah.
going here. But
Yeah.
then
Yeah. Yeah.
she was telling me this story and I don't know what it was. It was something at school, but then I just had to sit there and go, you know what? I'm going to slow down in this moment and listen to this story. And it's going
Yes.
to take, an extra 2 minutes of my day. And that's okay because there
Hmm.
might be a day that she doesn't want to tell me stories, And
Totally.
so I sat down and I listened. And one of the things too that like is fascinating to me is that with wine, you know, there really is this art of being present. You get a summer where there are, a lot of, days where it's really, really hot.
Hmm.
That is going to be something that as a winemaker, you're like going, all right,
Yes.
where are
Yes.
we at?
Yeah, and I think, like, one of my goals, when I first sort of set out to change my career was that I really wanted to work somewhere with an estate vineyard so that I could really understand it, so that I could see it on a day-to-day basis. Because I just don't think you learn those things or internalize them really well unless you're there and your boots on the ground, right? And I in my current role, we have two really nice vineyards that I'm not on site with those vineyards every day now, but I'm also putting together wines that sourcing bulk wine that I have no idea how those wines were made. I know how they taste. I can look at their chemistries. I can say that they're sound and that they meet a taste profile and maybe an AVA or a varietal requirement. But there are those big like swings in the wine industry, right? There's a huge spectrum in how connected you are to the land and the place. Um, with what you're making, and it could be very connected or it could be completely disconnected. So,
That's wild.
yeah.
It's super wild.
Um,
It's super interesting
but
to
there's
me.
a place for all of it, right? There's,
Yeah.
and I think the bottom line is that we are making a product and those products reach consumers differently, right? So the person that is going to come into the small tasting room and want to do a vineyard tour and, pay top dollar for boutique wines isn't necessarily the same person that's buying a $6 wine, at Vaughn's or your local supermarket.
It will, and what that leads to another question, like wine. How do we get more people drinking it? Because, like, it's like wine
Really
can
good
be
question.
yeah, wine can be intimidating to
It's
a lot
so
of people.
intimidating.
And
Yeah.
it's like especially to younger people, and I think that some of that can be I mean, especially when you get, some of the younger generations pushing back against, what they
Mhm.
perceive as boomer and boomer stuff. Like,
Yes.
what do you think that we can do to get younger people curious about wine? And I mean, over 21, obviously, but like younger people curious about wine.
Yeah, I think making it, yeah, less stuffy and more accessible. I really think the wine industry is trying to reinvent itself in terms of marketing because everything these days is marketed, right? We're marketed
Yeah,
to constantly, and I don't think that that used to be how people discovered wines. I feel like people used
interesting.
to discover wines by going to a tasting room or hearing about something or whatever it was, and now it's totally different. And I think that there's a high level of inauthenticity in some of the marketing that young people just read right into, and we have to do better. We really
I
do.
I I'm reminded of that Steve Buscemi sketch where Steve Buscemi is just like a high school guy, and he's like,
Mhm.
"Hey, I'm hip. I'm
Yes.
cool, and, like
Yeah.
and I'm like, some of the advertising I'm seeing, I'm just like,
It's
"Man,
not good. It's
it's
not
not."
good, the labels are tired, it's all of those things, and then I think the other part that's happening right now is being that the wine industry is contracting, my sort of hope is that a lot of the junk is getting weeded out, right? Because
Yeah.
there is sort of like a choice paralysis situation when you go to the store and you're like, well, I don't know a lot about wine and I see all these labels and I don't really understand like what to get, right? And there's just too much, there's too many choices. And so I would rather see more quality in the right, price segments, and some, stuff with good authenticity and better marketing.
There's a lot of copycat stuff too.
Yeah.
In especially the labels, like, you'll get one brand that just, like, does something innovative, and other people are like,
Yes.
"Let's do it just like that." And so you go to
Yes.
the store and you're like, "Oh, I heard about this thing and it looks this way." And you're like, "Oh, and there's 20 bottles that have that,"
Yep.
you know?
100%. Yeah,
And I
because everybody wants a little bit of the market share, right?
Yep.
And that's tough because then things get flooded and people get tired of it and they lose their luster. So, yeah, I think there are so many things that the wine industry needs to continue to improve upon. And one thing that has really resonated with me recently, I think, is, we're making quality wines. And we're also listening to the trends at the same time. That's really the best thing we can do. When I joined this company that I'm a part of now, we're making non-alc wines. And
Interesting.
I never set out to do that.
Yeah.
I set out to become a winemaker. But I've been able to look at some of these things from a scientific standpoint and also from a, revenue and marketing standpoint and say, well, there's a demand for this.
Yeah.
What's to say we shouldn't be also producing something like this, especially if we think we can do a good job.
Yeah. Interesting. It's like meeting people where they're at, and, like, you
Mhm.
can find a halfway point. But, that leads to another question. Like, you've worked in both luxury and commercial wine. Like,
Yes.
how has that shaped how you personally enjoy wine?
That's a really good question. Um, I drink a lot of local wines, but I also drink a lot of imported wines. And I think that I can see I can value a wide range of different types of wines because of that. You can get a really quality Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand for $12. Like it
Yeah,
doesn't have to be $70. And so I think with that, armed with that information, like when I go to, Total Wines or Grocery Outlet or wherever I go, Costco, like I'm open to wines of lots of different, price categories, and from different regions, because I think there can be really good wines made from lots of different places, at lots of different price points.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's like there's something for everyone. You just have to be open
Mhm.
to it, and you have to understand too that, like, what someone else loves doesn't have to be what you love. You
Oh,
can
totally.
enjoy something different. Um, and there's a lot of people that just think, for people that haven't really gotten into wine, what is something that you think that you just wish they understood? For me, last night, um, we had a wonderful day in my house. My younger brother-in-law, had his first baby,
Oh
and
my
so
gosh,
I
congratulations.
thank you. We went upstairs, we opened a bottle of wine. I had this Cab from Napa 2022. It's just a simple little thing. Enjoyed it, popped it, and poured glass for everyone in our house. And, we had a couple generations there just all celebrating. And my mother then proceeds to just shoot my mother-in-law proceeds to shoot her glass, and I was just like, "Okay. Okay, that's
Yep.
one way to do it." And my sister-in-law swirled it, smelled it. She's like, "This just tastes not good to me." And then I was just like, I took a sip and I was like, "This is one of the best cabs I've ever had." And my wife was like, "Where's the white wine?" And what cracked me up in the whole thing was that everyone was in a different place, but we all
Mhm.
enjoyed it in a different way. Like, that was
Yes.
kind of the cool thing for me. Like, the one thing that I wish that people understood was that what works for you doesn't have to work for someone else. And, like,
Yep.
literally, there's enough out there. If you're a sweet person, there's stuff that's sweet. If
There is.
you want something heavy and full bodied, dude, you can find that. There's
Mhm.
something for everyone.
Yeah, and I think the important part is, do you like it,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And I have that conversation with people often, and just over Christmas, we did a wine pairing with Christmas cookies with some friends,
Mm,
and, we've done it before with, like, potato chips and other things, and just, like, super lighthearted and fun, but, some serious wines and maybe some not so serious wines, and one of the gals that was there was like, "Well, explain this to me. I feel like this is, I'm not sophisticated enough to understand this stuff." And I was like, it has nothing to do with that. Like, this is just super fun. Just try it. You're not going to be wrong. Give it a go. You either like it or you don't. And that's it. And if you like it, stick with it. Right. And so that's, to me, that's really what matters. And, I think as people like are open their minds to it a little bit more, I think that, your palate will change, obviously. And like what you want to drink today is probably not what you're going to drink next year. We all go through phases and what we love changes. And, I think that that's pretty normal.
right. I love that. And like one of the things too is like, it really is like what do you enjoy? And I know that, like, I love to reference the music industry, not music industry, but just music in general,
Yeah.
because, what I listened to when I was 21 is very different from what I listen to now, and it's probably gonna be very
Mhm.
extremely different from what I'm listening to in 20 years, And it's
Yep.
like and it's okay to go through these cycles and to try different things.
Yeah.
And to figure things out, try things out. I have this new sweater that my wife bought me. I feel like I look like a sailor, but I'm trying it out
Just
because
because the collar goes backwards a
because the
little bit.
collar like that, it's got this little collar thing, and I was like
I like
and
it.
she bought it for me, and she's like, "It's a newer style," and she's like, "You're always very traditional." I'm like, "I will try this. I'm not
We'll
sure
try
if
it
I
out.
like it, but I'll try it out and see." It's warm.
Open-mindedness.
It's really warm, so that's a nice
Yeah.
thing. But,
I love it.
sometimes we all have to loosen up, and I
Mhm.
feel like the wine industry is starting to realize that as well,
I think you're right. Yeah. I think it's an important hurdle that we've needed to make for a long time.
right? What are some of your favorite varietals to work with or to drink? What do you like to kinda lean in on?
Yeah, super great question. If I could, do anything, I would probably primarily make white wine.
Mm,
I love lighter red wines, as well. But I think my favorite varietal to work with is Chardonnay, which is funny because I think a lot of people turn their nose up at Chardonnay because there's so much, in the market that, maybe isn't what people would like to drink. And then there's those people out there that just love Chardonnay and they won't drink anything else, right? But I have made some really, really lovely Chardonnays over the years from, Santa Barbara County in California,
mm,
and I feel like the grape itself is a winemaker grape, and I say that
mm,
because it has, like, a neutral character in a lot of ways. Obviously, like, how you treat it, you
mm,
can dial some things up or dial some things down. It really works well with oak influence,
mhm,
and there are a lot of, like, knobs and buttons that you can turn. So there's just so many choices, and I kinda think that's something that I love about it. I also think it's a really, like, versatile wine. It's something you can sit on the porch and have a glass. It's something you could pair with a really nice meal. There's the whole spectrum.
yeah,
So that's probably my favorite. I also really love Sauvignon Blanc. And I think making sparkling wine is just super challenging and
mm.
interesting and a complete labor of love to do it all by hand. Which is something that I've done over the years. And so, yeah, I think those are probably be my top 3, and some crossover there, obviously, using Chardonnay to make sparkling, yeah, love red wine too, just a little bit I think white wine speaks to me a little bit more.
What's the varietal that you're like, "Yeah, nah. Yeah, nah. That one's, not your friend, not one that you like to
Um,
play with."
it's a really good question, and I think that, it's like the same kinda thing, but, maybe you're happy to make it and you feel like you know how to make it well, but maybe you don't wanna drink it? And so, like, I really don't care for Petit Verdot, especially on its own. Blended into a red wine can be really good. And I also really don't love Rhone whites, especially Marsanne, some of the more oily whites. But if I needed to make Marsanne or Petit Verdot, I'd be happy to do it, and I think I can do it well. And so there's kind of like some fun differences there, but as far as, like, things that are challenging that, like, maybe I would rather not do if I was given the choice, I think Zinfandel is a really hard grape to work with. And I've made some Zins from different regions over the years, and it has a lot to do with, like, the physiology of the grape clusters and the berries themselves that just make it really challenging to do well, I think. So those types of challenges, it's like, well, if you can avoid that, that would be nice.
I'm sure.
So
We You hear a lot of winemakers talk about wine being a story in a glass. What does that mean to you?
Um, well, depending upon where it came from and, who worked on it and how far it traveled and, all of those things, I think that there's the amount of physical labor that goes into making wine is insane. Even at
Yeah.
a commercial scale, significantly more on a luxury scale when everything is being done by hand and with small, equipment. But I think even on a commercial scale, and that's kind of, from, grape to glass, the amount of touches that go into those things, even with mechanized farming, there is so much work that goes into it. And so I think that's kind of what it means to me. I try to think about, what we talked about earlier on is like if you're working in a place where you're in the vineyard and you're seeing what's going on from the inception of, the growth cycle, and the growing season, and then you get to put that into a bottle all the way at the end. You were kind of shepherding that for a very long time, right? And even over the winter when the barrels are pretty quiet and everything's buttoned up, it's still a responsibility. You're still checking on them regularly and monitoring how they're changing and progressing. So, lots of human efforts, I think, is a big part of that story.
Yeah, I love that. It's like one of the things that I think is a kind of not a problem, but a something that our entire Western society is still working through. There's been this disconnect. I don't know when it came in with the 50s, 60s, where people started disconnecting because we had access, like going back to the supermarket, having year-round food, and thinking that it was just the way it was. I know that in Southeast Asia, go to the fresh market, and there's just like what you had said, those apples that you're picking that were picked over a year ago. Like, we have all of this fresh fruit that comes in daily just from the
Yep,
countryside that has been brought in on a motorbike, and it's like, or a cart or something. And when you peel that banana or that mango or something, and it's just so succulent, fresh, ripe, and juicy. And, in a day or two, it's going to be beyond where it's supposed to be.
totally.
And what's amazing with that is that there's this realization that kind of this understanding that some things take time and some things are, when the time is right, you kind of step up. And like one of the things too that's so interesting is that, as you said, like you button the wines up for winter and you're just, all right, let's let this do it.
Yep,
I had a friend who, when I was in university, he was making his own wine, and he was just not a professional, but he was doing it for the first or second time, and he was just overwhelmed by each step of the process.
yeah,
He was like, "Oh, dude, just guess what I did today?" And I was like, "What did you do today?" He's like,
yeah,
"I did this and this and this process." And it was like, "How did that go for you?" He's like,
yep,
"Dude, it was awesome." And one of the things too is that there was this magic in the process, and I think that that's something that in our whole world, we've gotta figure that out again. I was working I was, with my nephews the other day and my daughter, and we've taken a pretty strong policy of no shorts, no short form content, just because it's driving the ADD type level stuff up through
sure,
the roof in our house.
yep,
And so we were like, "All right, we're gonna do something different tonight." And they're like, "What are we doing?" Because their parents were traveling, and I was on babysitting duty, and I said, "You're gonna come down and we're gonna watch a movie." And it was
Yes.
funny that they were just, like, bouncing around in their chairs, but then they settled in. And I think that there's something to be said, and for my daughter, we're very much, um, we work with her. She's been doing piano now for 4 years, and it's like the process of the journey, and, like, practicing the piano is not about 2 hours a day. It's about, can we get in 15 minutes consistently? And why I'm talking about that is, again, I love hearing about the winemaking process because, again, it is so analog. It's so organic. You're getting in there, and there's this recognition of things taking time. And in the meantime, there's all these other things that you got to be doing too.
Yeah. Well, and I think that patience is really a key thing. And a talented winemaker, I think, can, see a vineyard, taste grapes, look at a site, and have a plan and be able to mentally project where they would want that wine to be, 2 years down the line. Because that's kind of what you're looking at, right, is a very long time, and being able to understand the process well enough to translate it out through a lot of different things and a lot of different processes and aging and all of that to a final product. And things don't always go according to plan, so having the tools and skills to troubleshoot things along the way is important, but I think having that vision and understanding grapes well enough, is really super key.
I think that people don't, again, respect enough what you winemakers are doing because, and I wish that I could help people understand one thing, the challenges for every single batch, like for every
Mhm.
single time that you're making wine, because literally, like, we have this one phenomenal fruit cellar here in Ho Chi Minh City where I'm at. And what's amazing is that every single time we order fruit from them, it's great. I don't know how they get such great quality fruit, but it's phenomenal. And yet, every single time I taste that mango, every single time I taste that papaya, it's slightly different. It's slightly different. There's variants, like the variations in the taste from the same person. And that's just one person pulling from one source, probably one or two farms that they're sourcing everything from. That's exceptionally high quality. But then, I sit there and I might go to a lesser quality supermarket who also has the same fruit and it just does not taste great. And I'm just like, wow, this is not there. And then you as a winemaker have to sit there and go, wow, okay, that's where that's at. How do we take this and get to there?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think, it's we're not making Coors Light, we're not making,
Yep.
Diet Coke, right? We are making a product every year, with a goal in mind,
Yeah.
and a tight taste profile in mind and a consumer in mind, and obviously our place and our vineyards and those types of things. But, yeah, like, there is just an inherent beauty, I think, that it's gonna be variable, right? It's a product that has some variability with it no matter what.
And that's been that is part of the, you know, one of the cooler parts of wine culture that I hope that we never lose is this understanding that, different years, different vintages, different places have this thing. And so there is one of the things that I've always loved is kind of with wine is the journey of trying to find, the diamond in the rough. You're
Oh,
always
sure.
seeking out that treasure. And that's something that
Mhm.
to me is such a cool part of the wine journey because what happened in this year? What does this taste like? And then trying to once you find that, going, are there others like that this
Mhm.
year was really special? Let's go find some others that are really special.
Yep. I realized recently that I've been doing this long enough now that I can look back and say, "Oh, yeah, 2018 was, like, a really big harvest," or, 2019, there were a lot of fires, or, 2014 was an excellent year in this region, and, that's one thing that, you're getting a little bit old when you start to be able to remember and, recite those types of things. But, with something like wine, that's a product that takes a long time to make. Sometimes you're looking back at, maybe something that you have in your cellar and you're trying to think about what to open, or maybe you're looking at purchasing something and you're like, what did go on in, the Napa Valley in 2019? Is this something that I want to spend my money on? And so, having that information, having those conversations with people has been very interesting to me in the last couple of years, just because there is so much variability, vintage to vintage.
Yeah. Well, how has your relationship with wine changed as you've gotten deeper into the industry?
I feel like it ebbs and flows, right? And it kind of depends on what you're doing. So I recently, as the wine industry has been in the state that it's currently in, changed roles significant, like made a significant change in the work that I do. So, previously I was making really high end luxury wines from an estate program, and now I'm working for a producer that does that, but also, makes wines for Trader Joe's and makes wines for Costco. And so, you know, working my mind around how to take these, same skills, because they're applicable across, if the wine is one barrel versus, 100,000 gallons, like the principles are the same. But, just exploring and learning about how there are so many different parts of the wine industry that, you know, make the wheels turn. And they're all important, right? Just because you're making wine that's on the shelf for 10.99 doesn't it's not that different than someone that's making something that's 49.99, right? Like the ins and outs and what you do, it's just, it's tweaked different ways and there's different goals. And so, have felt very fortunate to be able to work in lots of different, parts of the industry in that way. But yeah, I think that, how I'm feeling about it now is, I'm looking at some of these opportunities to, make really good wines. And put them out there and influence people's palates, on a broader scale than I've ever been able to reach before. And that's because I am making wines for a larger company, but I'm also sourcing bulk wine, which is something that I hadn't been doing before. And so, when X grocery store comes knocking and says, "Can you put together a Sauvignon Blanc from the Central Coast for us?" What I decide tastes good is what's gonna hit the bottle. And so I feel like I lose sight of that sometimes, that, there's, sometimes you're maybe not making, these tiny premium lot wines, but you have a much greater reach, if you're making bigger programs and things like that. So, that's kinda where my head's been at recently. But yeah, I've just tried to keep really open to, where the industry is at right now and what kind of opportunities are out there. It's important that, businesses can stay profitable and make good wines, and, really, reach new customers. I think that's really been an important, trend over the last couple of years.
I love that. I love the um it's about the staying present as to where things are at, and the
Mhm.
journey unfolds, and I mean, I'm sure it's going to continue to unfold for you, in new
Oh,
ways.
yeah.
But you earlier in the conversation had talked about authenticity,
Mhm.
and um how does wine fit into this further shift toward more authentic, expression and more authentic experiences?
It's a really good question. I think that, there will always be a piece of any sort of, like, consumer-driven product that's gonna be inauthentic.
Yeah,
But I think wine is inherently authentic in the way that, like, there are people and farms and agriculture that are, like, required to produce wines. It's just a matter of the stewardship of, the businesses that are producing it. And so I think that's really where the responsibility lies. And, I feel fortunate to work for a company that, they've been farming for 150 years. They were farmers before they were winemakers.
that's awesome.
And I think that's really the basis of what we do. You can't make good wine out of bad grapes. You
Yeah.
can make bad wine out of good grapes.
Mhm.
But the opposite is not true. And so, I think the root of the authenticity really does come from the farming, and the sense of place. Um, and then, like I said, having, good companies that are doing the right things. That's where the authenticity really should come from, putting out a quality product.
I love that line, though. You can't make, good wine out of bad grapes, but you can
Mhm.
make bad wine out of good grapes. It is
Yes, you can.
some you know?
Winemakers can mess up good grapes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sounds totally true. If
Yes.
if wine disappeared tomorrow, what do you think we would actually be missing beyond just the drink itself?
I think that one thing that I personally feel about wine that is something that connects me to it is the connections that are made over wine, right? I feel like it's something that's so different. It's similar to, meeting up with a buddy or a friend to have a beer, but I feel like wine a little bit more often like includes a meal, or a special occasion, or something along those lines, where I feel like it's a facilitator for those types of experiences and the human connection. And in a lot of other places, wine is thought of as food. It's just part of day to day life. And so yeah, I think that warm feeling you get after you've had a glass of wine with a friend, like I think that's what we'd really be missing.
I love that. Where do you think wine is gonna be going? What excites you about where wine could go in the next couple years?
That's a great question. Um, I would like to see, and this is going to sound really like probably stuffy and stale, but I would like to see the industry find balance.
Mm,
I think that we are working towards balance right now, and that's what I would really like to see. I'd like to see companies being able to be profitable. I would like to see, people being really good stewards of the land, and being really, like we just talked about, authentic with their consumers, putting out good products, and not being in the situation that we're in where there's just so much excess bulk wine, there's unsold grapes, there's people having to rip out their vineyards. I just think if we can find a place where there's the right amount and the right things planted, and we find a healthy, economic place to be, that's what I would really like to see for our industry in the next, I hope it happens in the next 10 years.
yeah. Where can people find out more information about you and what you do?
So I'm on Instagram. I think that one of the brands that I make, called Pandemonium, has an Instagram as well. I work for Miller Family Wine Company. We have a whole family of brands and several vineyards, so there's some good information there. But yeah, those are probably the best places.
Awesome. And one last question. If you could go back and give your younger self some advice about making wine, what would you give her? What advice would you give yourself?
Start earlier.
Mm.
Um, and I would have worked more harvests abroad.
Oh,
That those experiences were so incredible, and just the things you learn, working in different countries and learning about different cultures while also learning, technical skills. I wish that I had been a little bit younger when I started, and I wish that I'd done more of that.